deity. We would go farther, and they must promote the true religion, that is Christianity. So you can have disagreement, but here's what you have to do. You have to be intellectually honest. You have to be intellectually honest and say, I disagree with John Calvin. I disagree with the Belgian Confession. I disagree with the Westminster Confession of Faith. I disagree with Calvin. I disagree with him. I disagree. I take exception from all of these men. And what you're implicitly saying if with that, let's be honest, I'm smarter than them.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint. Thank you so much for listening. This episode is brought to you by Future of Christendom. Head over to futureofchristendom.org for events. We have our October conference coming up. We also have a lot of great content from other conferences we did. We've got debates and books and other podcasts on there. So head over to futureofchristendom.org. And also we have t-shirts for sale as well. So check out futureofchristendom.org. A couple clips to get through today. And this is the Think and Reform podcast. This is a God's Law promoting podcast, right? We don't limit it to God's Law, of course. Last episode was about Eastern Orthodoxy. But this is a Christian podcast where we promote the law of God, or we focus on promoting the law of God at the expense of all other political systems, right? The ultimate goal is to be faithful to Christ and His Word in the areas where the world is fighting. And we believe at Future of Christendom that the gospel will go forth from a Christian nation most effectively where God's law is established. God's law perpetually protects the gospel message of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And when you institute man's law in your society, you eventually make living out the gospel illegal and dangerous. So this is a podcast where we promote God's law because we want the gospel to go forth freely, not only in our own houses, in our communities, but also in our nation and the nations of others as well. I'm going to start this one off today by talking about a quote I came across. I'm doing some research about the Pilgrims, about the separatists that started the New Plymouth colony here back in 1620 in Massachusetts. And doing my research, I'm reading basically every book I can get my hands on. I love reading about this stuff. I love reading about the history and the fact that I think a lot of people, I'm getting the impression a lot of historians looked into someone like William Bradford. I used to think that the greatest American of all time was George Washington, and now I think there's a duel happening in my mind for who was greater, William Bradford or George Washington. And I think a lot of people, I get the impression when I'm reading these books, a lot of people thought that they were going to find dirt on William Bradford. And I think a lot of them became admirers of William Bradford. I think they were surprised at what they found. A lot of the authors, there's a lot of the authors I'm reading kind of had this negative view towards the Puritans, right? And they thought that reading about what was going on in Plymouth Colony was going to give them dirt on, the head honcho there, who was, William Bradford. And I'm getting this impression that every single one who kind of went in looking for dirt on Bradford, like he was going to be, like they probably heard about him. They probably heard about, the first time I heard about William Bradford, besides the cursory, he was the governor of Plymouth Colony, was probably a Reddit article talking about how on Christmas Day, William Bradford went through and he picked up all the balls that people were playing with, and he made it illegal for you to play games on Christmas and the Sabbath and things like that. I think that people were like, okay, so let's check out the history of Plymouth Colony here, and this is going to be so easy. It's going to be a hit piece on these guys. And I really get the impression that people went in and they came away going, wow, actually Bradford was like just a really great guy. There's like almost no dirt on the guy at all. He was a faithful man. He was not ambitious. He wasn't trying to enslave blacks. He wasn't trying to get rich off the backs of others. One of the authors I read was when they had finally purchased they had paid off all their debts to the English adventurers. Was it called the Warwick Settlement? I think it was called. One of the authors indicated this was a time that Bradford really could have gotten a lot of power and a lot of money, but he didn't. And the author said, but Bradford just wasn't that kind of man. And I think that was the author, in my opinion, the author just had to say that about Bradford. And I think a lot of people look into the history of Plymouth Colony expecting to find, all the stereotypes about the Puritans, and they just, in the person of William Bradford, I think everyone's blown away. Now, I think there's probably a lot of people out there that probably read Bradford and his of Plymouth, his history of the Plymouth Colony, and I think that they come away and they read a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs and they're like, this guy was a Puritan jerk. All Puritans were jerks. The Puritan is that person out there in the world who's afraid that someone's going to have fun. I think is a paraphrase of someone who tried to tritely sum up Puritanism. But I think everyone who takes a deep dive into William Bradford is extremely impressed by this man's humility, his faithfulness to his friends and people he didn't even know. And a lot of the Plymouth Colony, how they just brought in a lot of Indians, and there's this kind of like Hollywood trajectory that you expect. I think a lot of people that when they look into it, they expect like, oh, they went in there and the first thing they did was they found an Indian and they killed him, and then they found another Indian and they killed him too, and then they lied to the Indians and they took away their property, and then they read stories about how 3 men found a lone Indian walking, and then they stole his beaver skins and his possessions, and tried to kill him. But he was, being an Indian, being very hardy, he made it back to his village and was able to identify later. He died shortly thereafter, but he was able to name the people who wronged him. And these were 3 settlers. And I think a lot of people would be expecting, well, Bradford just swept it under the rug, or he didn't do anything about it. But no, Bradford and the colonists arrested those 3 men. They put them on trial. They brought in, if I remember correctly, Indian witnesses, and they killed those men as a punishment for killing that Indian. I think a lot of people were not expecting that. That's the kind of attitude that they had towards the Indians. Did they do everything right? No, they didn't do everything right. Stop it. I never claimed that. All right. Think of your favorite hero. Okay. When you tell me you like someone, I don't jump in there and say, oh, he did he do everything right? Blah, 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 blah. So, but I just think a lot of people who, I'm getting the impression from these authors I'm reading that I think a lot of people started with this conception, like it's going to be really easy. I'm going to be 50-50 on Bradford. I think a lot of people came away very impressed with Bradford. So as I'm reading through these books, I'm coming across a lot of great quotes. There's a lot of research that's being done, especially some of the books I'm reading into the history of the English Reformation. I came across this quote here by John Milton that was quoted in the books, and it says this: "Truth is compared in Scripture to a streaming fountain. If her waters flow not in a perpetual progression, they sicken into a muddy pool of conformity and tradition." Okay, that's John Milton, right? He was obviously a Puritan. And the frustration that I get when I come across Reformed traditionalists, the people who are like the Reformed tradition, as if it's monolithic, it's not, right? Looking into the English Reformation, right? You had the initial step of the English Reformation, which was England stepping away from Rome, right? Henry V, and they go and they say, we're going to have our own church. Thanks, but no thanks. See you later. Adios, right? But it stopped there for a while, right? And what the Puritans were like, hey, the Reformation hasn't gone far enough here, right? But we have 2 or 3 streams, we could say 5 or 6 streams, from the time that England separated from Rome. You have these children and stepchildren of that decision. And my frustration with the people who are like, I'm a Reformed traditionalist, I assume the Reformed tradition. My frustration there is, which Reformed tradition are you talking about? Because you had the Puritans who are clearly Reformed, who reject a lot of the traditions of the Anglican Church, who also claims to be Reformed. Are the Anglicans not Reformed? Do they not claim to be Reformed as well? But they have all these extra traditions that the Puritans rejected. And here's John Milton, right? Truth is compared in Scripture to a streaming fountain. If her waters flow not in a perpetual progression, right? Semper reformanda, that's what he's saying there. They sicken into a muddy pool of conformity and tradition. And my question is, which tradition of the fathers do you want to go with? Okay, because they're contradictory traditions. Here's John Milton, someone who's older than wiser than you. Okay, right? He's older than wiser than you, so he's got to be right. We'll get into that in a little bit. Who's saying we cannot allow the Scriptures to sink into a muddy pool of conformity and tradition. And yet there's a stream of people out there who are like, oh no, we need to go back to tradition. Tradition's got to be our foundation, right? That's what this is all about, the Reformed tradition, right? We got to get back to that. You know, there's a tradition within Reformed tradition that denies tradition as authoritative. Do you know that? There's a tradition inside the Reformed tradition, right, that rejects tradition as authoritative. Is that what you mean when you say the Reformed tradition? Because if you say I hold to the Reformed tradition, then you're being contradictory. Another question I have is, which one of the Reformers told you to follow their traditions? I want to know. Which one wrote down and said, hey, we got it right here. This tradition, follow it. All you who are after me, follow it. Which one of them told you that? None of them did, right? Okay, so it's just you making stuff up, isn't it? Yeah. That's all it is. You're just making stuff up. None of them said, hey, follow our traditions. The Reformed tradition is such a great placeholder for whatever you want it to be. For whatever you're trying to promote, it's a great placeholder. It's like the term Christian nation. It's a great placeholder, but what does it actually mean? Whose definition of Christian nation? Whose definition of the Reformed tradition? Which ones? The Reformed tradition doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have a middle, and it doesn't have an end. It's open-ended. It's a foggy thing. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying it's a bad foundation. And there are so many people out there who are trying, especially the Christian nationalists, who are trying to build off of that foundation, that very shaky foundation. The law of God has a beginning and it has a middle and it has an end. It's not open-ended. It's definable, it's knowable, you can read it and you can know what it says, okay? That should be our foundation, the Scriptures. But that's asking a lot among the Reformed tradition people, as you'll see here in a little bit. Let's get to our first clip here. I don't want to go with this one here. Let's go with this one. Okay. There it is.
Right. I grew up in Idaho. Like, I know, yeah.
Evan Hafer on Joe Rogan here. I want to talk about this briefly before we get into the Reformed tradition silliness. So let's let him talk.
That exists, but I'm so, blithely like moving through the world, like thinking everybody's an American male, right? Like,
Right.
Now this is weird. And then, you go to Iraq, or I went to Iraq and multiple rotations over there, and you start to assimilate with the Iraqis you're either working with or you're training with, and then it kind of starts to fall apart, where it's like, oh, this is somewhat normal for them. Now, they don't talk about it, and I'm not saying it's like everyone, by the way. I'm saying like it's at least relevant enough culturally where it's somewhat normalized and not talked about. It's very
Is it similar in Kuwait as Afghanistan, or do they vary? Iraq is different?
Yeah, they're all a little bit different. The Afghanis, we had to have, depending on where we were in their barracks living situation, like you had to put really hard restrictions, like, no butt guys for the majority of this, because this is a health issue. We weren't like, it's not like we were putting Bibles on their beds or something.
Right.
We're just saying, hey, this is really unhealthy. You guys are going to spread a bunch of different diseases to one another. And like, we've got a mission to accomplish here. And every SF guy, every guy that's like been in Afghanistan knows what Man Love Thursday is. And it's kind of a thing that they do.
Is it just Thursday, or is it? That's just a thing.
It's just a
to
thing.
say.
Yeah.
But it's just they fuck each other.
Yeah, they like it.
And so there's the kid with the blue eyes, and after a while you're like, hey, they don't really want to camp with him. They're trying to fuck this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you start thinking like, hey, how much of this is going on?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And then as you're exposed to not more of it, because you don't really see it, you hear about it. So as you build rapport, build confidence in your friendships, and people will start to talk about, but it is fairly pervasive, and it's one of those things that you just kind of accept that that's happening from a good portion of the guys. And
50%, 60%.
Well, what we talked about, like kind of rewinding, it's the more disturbing factor is it's socially indoctrinated in the children, like the sexual exploitation of children. So it starts early and then it moves into the adulthood. Bachabazi is a real thing, and it's dressing boys to look like girls, and they have some Afghanis. When I say some, I don't know how pervasive it is, but it's a big percentage. And the adult male stuff, that's like one subsegment of their culture, but it's the sexual exploitation of children, that when you find that out, that's when things really turn for you psychologically. You're like, this place is really and it's very pervasive. If you go back and you read The Kite Runner, I read The Kite Runner when I was in Afghanistan, I realized that it's not only the story about this kid, but it's also the story of Afghanistan. It's very, very, those stories run parallel, because children are sexually exploited regularly, and it's mainly the boys, from what I understand, to the point of which I was driving out on this op, I guess, from Kabul to Jalalabad. And when I first got to Afghanistan, I used to see these truck drivers, and I thought, my dad was a truck driver. It's really cool these truck drivers take their sons out with them on the road. That's such a really cool cultural thing. And my interpreter turned to me, he's like, those aren't their kids, dude. That's how horrible it is.
It's so horrible that they're on display.
Yes.
They're on parade, even, you were saying. The guys would parade around their harem.
Kandahar and different areas, they'll have parades, and they're on displays to, this is my harem, and they're proud of it. And that was one of the most disturbing things that we would talk about, specifically between like the departments, between Department of State, CIA, and the military. Is like, when you're out with the guys from a tactical and combat role, you see them and you interact with the way they are from a tactical level every day. And you'd bring this up to management, and they would say, oh, what do you mean? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Or they pretend it doesn't happen. But if you were on the ground in Afghanistan during the times I was there, honestly, from 2001, we'll say, to the time that we pulled out, everybody uniformly would agree with what I'm saying. If you spent some time in Afghanistan, you knew that it was happening.
Okay, so I played that at length for a little bit there to demonstrate a point about the way God's system institutes just war, just warfare, just war theory. So God's system, when you go out to war, you line everybody up right? And you ask them these questions: does anyone have a vineyard? Does anyone have a wife? Does anyone have any good reason that they basically should not come come out and fight with us? Is anyone afraid, right? And they give you an opportunity to not participate in this, which is the opposite way that statist and humanist systems work. They basically take away any reason from you and force you to go out there, right? Or they lie to you about the real reason that they're going out there. God's system lines you up and says, we don't want people who don't believe in what we're doing. That's what's going on here by asking people this question: who's got a wife? If you want to be with her more than you want to be out here fighting, then go home to her. We don't want you with us. Who's got a new vineyard? Who just bought a new house? If you just bought a new house and you'd rather be out there, kicking your feet up and watching the sunset, rather than being out here fighting with us, we don't want you here. Is any of you afraid? Or do any of you not believe in what we're doing? Right? Do you not believe in the mission of this war? If you don't, we don't want you here. We don't want you with us because we don't want cowards. If you have a just war intention, if the intention of this warfare that you're going out on is just, then people will find a reason, men especially, will find a reason to go out and fight. This is what we should be fighting our wars about right here. And you can see with this guy and the way he's talking, the look in his eyes. This man, I believe, if he was lined up back in 2001 rather than we're going to go save our freedoms out in Iraq. Famous question, what are our freedoms doing in Iraq? But whatever. If you lined up the men of a nation for warfare and said, there is a culture in Afghanistan that promotes the exploitation of children, and it's a horrible culture, and we're going to war against that. We're going to put a stop to it. We're going to put an end to it. No, we're not going to establish democracy, right? We're going to put an end to this horrible practice, right? Men will absolutely find a reason to go to war with you. That's a just cause. That's a good reason to go to war. You can see it from this guy that he would do that. He would fight for these poor kids out there. He said there's a psychological shift that happens. And of course, the American government, pretend like it doesn't happen. They're useless, right? They do war the statist way. But the way that God's system sets up warfare and what is just war allows for people who don't believe in the war to not participate, which forces the magistrate or the leader of the war to only go out to war when he knows that he's got the people behind him. Our system's the opposite. Whether or not the people are behind the magistrate or not, we're going to war anyway. It doesn't matter, right? He's in charge. Doesn't matter. Completely irrelevant to the question, do you believe in this war? Not a factor. Going to war anyway. But God, the way that God's system does warfare, the type of wars that you actually go out and fight are ones that the people are fighting actually believe in en masse. And if Trump was to line everyone up and say, hey, we're going to fight for cheap gas prices, I'm not risking my life for that. No, I don't believe in this war. I'm not participating. I'm not doing that. However, if Trump lined everyone up and said, hey, we're going to fight this wicked culture and we're going to put an end to this buggery that's going on out here in Afghanistan, you better believe everyone would be like, sign me up. When are we leaving? God's system of conducting warfare is superior to that of any man-made system because it forces the magistrate to take into account the will of the people and what they're willing to lay down their lives for. Whereas man-made systems, the will of the people and what they're willing to lay down their lives for is completely irrelevant. So when I saw this clip, I was just thinking about if we did warfare the right way, we could put an end to this kind of silliness in other nations. And it would not be difficult. Okay. Next clip I want to talk about is this. My friend Tom. Tom, thanks for sending me all this stuff. He's always sending me good stuff. I just don't have enough time to get through it. But this is from him. The next two clips are sent to me from him. So thanks again, Tom. I just forgive me for not being able to get through everything you send me, because I got to pick and choose at this point. It's so much really good stuff coming through. So I just want to play the beginning of this clip. Okay. I think his name is Caleb Pierce. Sorry, Caleb, if I'm on here. It's P-I-R-C. I guess it might be Pierce, or it might be, I don't think it's Perk. Maybe it is Pierce. I don't know. So let's let him talk. So just a little background here. The explanation or the description of this video is, in this episode of Kings and Statesmen, which is this is put on by New St. Andrews College. In this episode of Kings and Statesmen, Lennox Califungua sits down with Caleb Pierce, I think it's Pierce, director of the Idaho Family Policy Center, IFPC, Legal Center, to examine the nature of law, what it is, how it ought to be applied, and what kinds of laws are necessary for a nation and republic to remain truly free and prosperous. Okay. I just want to play the intro. I listened to a big clip of this, but I think the intro, they put a lot of his statements in there, and I want to respond to some of the things he's saying. So let's listen to the intro of this.
Our Christian nation was rooted in Christian principles, and our law was derived from the common law of England, which is derived directly from Scripture. Our whole legal system is based off the idea that there is objective truth, right? That's why we have, a jury system. That's why we have, these sorts of presumptions in place, because we understand that we want to get to the truth. Law doesn't exist just to restrain evil, but it also ultimately exists to reward virtue and to inculcate virtue in the citizenry.
Okay, so reward virtue. Okay, so the scriptures in Romans 13 say, punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. There's no mention of reward there. I don't know where this term is coming from. I'd like to find the source of it. I don't know where it's coming from, but I would like to find the source of it. It says nothing about reward. The scriptures don't talk about rewarding those who do good. Okay, you can try and find it, because I know it's in there somewhere. I think there's some sort of confession, or there's some sort of phrase that we should, like this. It's like a Mandela effect, I guess, that we think it says reward. It doesn't say reward. It says praise. I think maybe some translations say praise, reward, but the word is laudation, verbal praise to those who do good. So the magistrate's not supposed to reward those who do good, right? He's supposed to praise those who do good. Maybe you could say, well, that's the same thing. Okay, but let's tether it to what it actually says. Praise those who do good, and by praising them, that's their reward. Let's not do verbal praise is just one of the many ways that the magistrate can reward them. He can give you financial bonuses. He can give you status. He can give. I mean, like no. We can't be doing that. That's silliness. That's not what the Bible says. So we got to get this out of our head that like the magistrate is supposed to reward those who do good. I just want to double check what I'm saying here, because I hear it so many times. Like I'm like, I got to be missing something, right? Let's just type in the word reward here. Let's go New Testament. Okay, Matthew, no. Okay, let's go to the passages here. 1 Corinthians, Colossians. Okay, there's nothing in Romans and nothing in Peter about reward. And that's where we get a lot of the praise those who do good, right? Let's try this word praise. Right, let's go New Testament. Okay, they have received a reward. Okay, Luke, Romans, okay. Now, praise in the English Standard Version doesn't show up in Romans 13. And it's not showing up. Is it in Peter? Do we see? Oh, wait. Praise, no. Okay, so in 1 Peter 2:14, we're to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. Okay, there's the word praise right there. But it's not showing up here in Romans. Why isn't it showing up here in Romans? Okay, let's go to Romans 13. What word do they use? Oops. Okay, yeah, I guess I opened up a new thing here. What was not terror to good conduct but to bad? Would you have no fear of the one who is authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. His approval. Some word, some translations, I guess, maybe put that as a reward. Maybe put that as praise. And the Peter passage also puts it as praise. Okay, so unless someone knows of a passage that I'm just not really thinking about, could you please tell me where we get this idea that the magistrate should be rewarding people for doing good? Is that a holdover from Roman paganism, or I mean, what are we doing here? Just want to point that out.
Lawmaking as an art of trying to discover God's law.
Okay, there's the phrase I wanted to get to. Ooh, let's rewind it just a tad here. Okay, let's rewind it just a tad.
This to reward virtue and to inculcate virtue in the citizenry. Lawmaking as an art of trying to discover God's law.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Discover God's law? I don't want to roast this guy because I think he's a nice guy and he's a faithful man. So I'm not going to dunk on him, but I'm a little concerned that we're walking around using this term, lawmaking as an art, trying to discover God's law. Like we don't know what God's law is. We're experimenting on the population. Oh, that law worked. No, that one didn't work. I mean, how often do you see the magistrate repeal a law like they're experimenting on us? Like we tried this and we try that, you know. Is that what we're talking about here? We're discovering God's law, right? Like discovering an antidote, trial and error. How do we know when we found God's law? What are the signs? People are prosperous? People are punished? Is this like a never-ending thing? We'll never truly discover it? I got a lot of questions about that statement. What does it mean to discover God's law? Maybe he talks about it in this because I listened probably about half of it. And maybe there's a part where he explains himself a little bit more. But I don't think as Christians we should be going around saying this, especially as lawmakers, saying like, yeah, God's law is still yet to be discovered. Let's go to Deuteronomy. I always get the phraseology wrong. But Google always fixes my favorite phraseology. Yes, 30:14. Thank you, Google. Deuteronomy 30:14. Okay, so let's start at verse 9. The Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all the work of your hand, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your cattle, and in the fruit of your ground. Okay, dominion. God will make you prosperous in dominion, what you're supposed to be doing. God will make you prosperous in dominion. For the Lord will again take delight in prospering you, as he took delight in your fathers, when you obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that are written in this book of the law, when you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. For this commandment that I command you today is not too hard from you, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will ascend to heaven for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will go over the sea and bring for us, who will go over the sea for us and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it. But the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it. That's Moses. This is not a message from Moses that this is yet to be discovered. All right? I think when you start with God's law needs to be discovered, you're never going to discover it. It's never going to happen. It's always, well, that law is good for that time and place, but it might not be good for here and now, right? God's law was never that's good for that time and place. Every single law had a purpose, right, to point us to Christ. Every single one, right? The ones that are fulfilled are meant to point us to Christ. Some of them aren't fulfilled. It's not okay to commit adultery. It's not okay to murder, right? As far as their purpose in the life of a Christian. But here's Moses saying, this is not something that you need to discover. I don't want any excuses from any of you people saying, hey, we don't know. I didn't get it. It was too hard. It was too difficult. But wait, it was far away. No, we can't possibly know what God's trying to get us to do. It's too difficult for us, right? It's too difficult to know. We can't do it. Moses is saying, no, that's not going to be an excuse for you people. I don't want to hear about that. This law, you know what it is. He says the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart so that you can do it. I don't want to hear any sort of complaints from you people about but what about this, Moses? What about this situation right here? What if two women come, right, and they are prostitutes, and one of them had a baby, and the other one steals the other baby at nighttime, and they both claim it's theirs? Moses, what do we do? What do we do, Moses? Where's your answer for that? I'm looking at the law of God. It says nothing about that, Moses. What do we do? Moses is not having any of it. I don't want to hear any excuses from you people about this is too difficult. No, you have it with you. You guys are fully equipped. I don't want to hear any sort of complaints from you people about this is too difficult. We don't get it. They just came out of 400 years of Egyptian paganism. 400 years. They're being introduced to this law that's clearly written down, that has a beginning and a middle and an end. By the standards of Christians today, they're not ready for it. They're not. We can't do that right now, right? Do you think that, us in our Christian culture, where we eat, live, breathe Christian philosophy, right? We all think like Christians. Do you think that we're less equipped to do the law than these people coming out of Egyptian paganism for 400 years? Do you think we're less equipped than they are? This has got to be the attitude of every Christian when it comes to the law. I don't want to hear any sort of complaints from God's people about God's law. It's too difficult. We don't know what it is. And we can't have people walking around saying things like, God's law is yet to be discovered. And we're experimenting on the population until we discover it. Let's try this law right here. Oh, that didn't work. Let's get rid of it. Like that ever happens? Do they ever get rid of a law? Is that happening in legislation? How many laws did they get rid of compared to the laws that they institute? Now, I'm sure this guy obviously has an answer, and I'm sure he's got an explanation for what he said. I just want to let you know, I'm a little alarmed that we have lawmakers saying that God's law is yet to be discovered. I don't think we should be saying that, because we already know what it is.
Is sometimes being precise, right? We're fallen humans, we're fallible. As a general rule, any law that's outside this to reward virtue and to inculcate virtue in the citizenry. Lawmaking as an art of trying to discover God's law is sometimes being precise, right? We're fallen humans.
Can sometimes be imprecise for fallen humans. Oof. The birds are causing the sickness. Kill all the birds. Oh, that didn't work. Now there's nothing here to eat all the bugs. Now our crops are destroyed. Oh, whoops. We're fallen people.
We're fallible. As a general rule, any law that's outside of the law that's ordained by God is a perversion of law, and it's not.
Any law that is outside, I see, and that's my problem again. What does that mean, outside the law of God? Right? Were the Pharisees making laws outside the law of God? Were the Pharisees not doing the general equity thing? Were they not doing that? Can you tell me that right now, look me in the eye and say the Pharisees were not general equity people? Say, oh, no. The speed limit is general equity, but taking so many steps on the Sabbath is not general equity. It's got nothing to do. That's way outside the law of God. And yet there's Jesus saying, why do you make void the commandments of God through your traditions? Why are you teaching as doctrines the commandments of men? For people who are, who take an understanding of general equity that kind of allows for the institution of things that are not God's law, I have a question. Can you define for me what it means to teach as doctrines the commandments of men? What does that mean? What does that look like? Can you define it? Can you give an example of it happening in history? Were not the Pharisees doing that? And can you tell me they weren't using general equity? Something to think about.
Not even law at all.
Okay, so I just wanted to go through that, and those clips, they kind of put together some interesting clips right at the beginning of the presentation there. But he said a lot in a little there, and I think he's demonstrating, in my opinion, some problems with the Christian mindset when it comes to law, that we don't know what God's law really is, and we're still discovering it, right? I think that's with respect to him, right? I'm sure he's a nice guy. He's an educated man. But I think that's still a holdover from Roman pagan silliness that we don't know. We're still discovering. It's a process. That's not a biblical idea. You can't go to the Bible for that idea. He has shown you, O man, what is good. He has shown you what is good. Now, we're still discovering what is good. He's shown you what is good. It's past tense. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly. If we haven't discovered God's law, how could we possibly do justly? And love mercy and walk humbly with God if we're still discovering it. God expects that from his people. Not even his people, but to mankind, because that command was issued towards Adam, not Israel. He has shown you, Adam, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? He's shown you, mankind, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly. If we're still discovering God's law, you can't do it. We don't know what your law says. We're still discovering it. And we're fallible people. We're going to get it wrong. We don't know what your law says. And I think that's a holdover from paganism. So let's go to NXR, my favorite Christian statists, and let's take a look at what they're saying here. This is a clip called The Reformation, the State, and the Church, Part 1. This was just a month ago, but I'm only going to play a small clip of this. A lot of it is Webben pontificating, and I think a lot of people are kind of tired of hearing Webben pontificate. So let's go to his associate's name is Wes. I think it's Wes. He says something I want to comment here. So here we go.
Of the Right Response Ministries podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the need for the civil magistrate to absolutely decimate, by rule of law, blasphemies, those things which rise up against the knowledge of Christ, that it's not just changing hearts and minds. It's not just in the coliseum of ideas seeking to change the hearts and minds of our fellow kinsmen through persuasion, but there actually is a role of the Christian prince, the civil magistrate, to say, no, you're not allowed to bring judgment upon the nation through idolatry. This is good.
Amen.
Good and right and pleasing to the Lord. It's also loving and good for the people of a nation. We're going to talk about that and build a biblical argument for it today.
I'm going to start today's episode by reading from the introduction to the recently published book, Reformed Christian Politics by Stephen Wolfe, Sean McGowan, and Zachary Garris. These are three Presbyterians, two of them laymen, one of them a minister, although he was defrocked. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, deeply steeped in the classics. And
Okay, deeply steeped in the classics. How is that relevant? Now, I think a lot of people are going to be offended by even me even asking that question. We came from the classics. We're heavily influenced by the classics. Okay, get rid of the classics to the discussion of how does a just society operate? And nobody's ever even heard of the classics. We don't know, or maybe you grew up in America, you've been influenced by the classics, right? But you can't really name any of their works. You don't know who the authors are. You never read any of their stuff. What do we lose? Are we not equipped to establish justice in the land? Is that the argument? Like, if we never read Aristotle, what am I missing? I challenged somebody on social media recently about that. He just went onto a post and said, hey, man, keep reading Aristotle. I said, well, if we don't read Aristotle, what do we lose? And he said, well, teleology, right? The purpose of a thing, right? And I thought that was surprising that he thought a Greek pagan could really inform a body of believers on what our purpose is. And then I said, well, we already know what our purpose is. The purpose is dominion. And then he came back with a response saying, well, does the Bible tells me what the purpose of a computer is, what the purpose of a car is? And I mean, you don't need the Bible for that kind of stuff. And then I had to go back and highlight my comment and said, for the purpose of mankind, we know what man's purpose is. We don't need Greek pagans telling us there's a different purpose besides what God has told us. And that was the end of the argument right there. But that's about as deep as these, online thinkers go. They say read Aristotle because they saw someone smart say it. They don't read Aristotle themselves. They can't understand Aristotle. Aristotle's talking to a time and a place thousands of years ago that's completely irrelevant to what we're trying to do now. Okay, Aristotle. I mean, we got children dying around us, and we have homosexuals and perverts taking over the country, and we're killing babies. Aristotle has no answers for that. I'm sorry, but he's got no answers, right? So what does it mean if you're deeply steeped in the classics versus the guys who aren't? What do you lose? Tell me what you lost when it comes to establishing justice in the land. Are we saying you need to be deeply steeped in the scriptures and the classics? Are they on the same level? Is someone who's deeply steeped in scripture but never reads the classics, is he like at a disadvantage here? What's the cash value of being deeply steeped in the classics? Right? I've read some of the classics, right? I've read Cicero, right? I've read some of Plato. Tell me what I'm missing because I didn't read Seneca. All right? I haven't really read much of Socrates. All right? I read a little bit by Aristotle here and there. What am I missing? Am I not equipped for every good work now? I just want to know what the cash value of the classics are. By somebody who's like, yes, I'm deeply steeped in classics. Here's what you're missing. Just want to know what it is.
Putting forward a positive.
I want to know what it is. Okay, so just beyond, like, because I know someone could come and say, well, you don't know about this controversy, you don't know about this ism or that ism, right? And I'll agree, yeah, maybe I don't know about that ism. How am I not equipped to establish justice in the land? And that's what God requires, right? He wants justice in the land, right? He wants the magistrate to eat and drink and do justice, right? And then it will go well for you, right? That's God's requirement of the magistrate. Does the magistrate need Aristotle for that, or in the classics? Does he need to be deeply steeped in the classics? If he's never heard of the classics, is he not equipped to do that? How can the magistrate honor the Lord, love God, and love his neighbor? Does he need the classics for that? And if he's never read the classics, is he ill-equipped for that purpose? That's what I want to know.
Protestant vision of political engagement in the 21st century. Now, this episode is going to have two parts. In the first part, we're going to talk about the theory. We're going to talk about theology. It's going to be abstract. But in the second, we're going to take all of that and apply it to our American context. And I want you to catch the transition here because there's a lot of guys that live in the abstract. That is, they can tell you the right answer to a question. They can tell you what Turretin said. They can tell you what Calvin said. But you ask them to take that and to apply it and then to actually get it enforced, to get other people to agree with you. And that entire second part breaks down. It's not enough to just have the theory. You then must apply it prudentially. Politics is practical. Politics is the art of the possible.
There it is, my favorite status phrase right there. Oh, that's right up there with speeding is a sin. I keep saying this over and over again. You don't want people thinking in terms of what's possible. Okay? That's for a venture capitalist. Okay? That's for a business owner. All right? That's for an aspiring NBA player. It's not for a magistrate to be thinking in terms of what's possible and what's not possible. That's national suicide. Our leaders have got to be thinking in terms of what's right and what's wrong, what's just and unjust, what's wicked and what's righteous. That's what they got to be thinking in terms of. If we surrender them, yes, instead of thinking in those other terms, start thinking in terms of what's possible. You're basically shooting yourself in the foot. You don't want your leaders thinking in terms of what's possible. You don't want to be promoting that. You don't want to be encouraging that. Hey, think in terms of what's possible. I don't want my politicians thinking in terms of what's possible. There are a lot of politicians right there who don't think it's possible to get rid of abortion. I don't want you thinking in those terms. There's a lot of politicians that didn't think it was possible to get rid of slavery. Don't want you thinking in those terms. God has not set politicians up to think in terms of what's possible. Our message from God is not the art of the possible. Our message from God is, thus saith the Lord, this is right and this is wrong. Oh, but it's not possible. Do I look like I care? Does God look like he cares? Is that ever excuse that works with God? But God, it's so hard. God, I just don't see it happening. Is that what we want our leaders thinking in terms of? Asinine.
You must be able to actually achieve your ends, not just know the right answer, not just know ideally what you would want in the world. So 2 parts of this episode. The first part, does the civil magistrate have the responsibility to promote true religion? And if so, how should he do so? And for us as Americans, what would that look like in America? Again, I'm reading now from the Introduction to Reformed Christian Politics by Stephen Wolfe, Sean McGowan, and Zachary Garris. They say this. In the history of Reformed political thought, the principle that civil government ought to promote true religion has been nearly ubiquitous. Moreover, most have considered it immutable and absolute, and thus a civil ruler must promote true religion. But Introduction to Reformed Christian Politics by Stephen Wolfe, Sean McGowan, and Zachary
Let's make sure I heard him right on
Garris. They say this. In the history of Reformed political thought, the principle that civil government ought to promote true religion.
In the history of Reformed political thought? Okay. So now I got to be deeply steeped in the classics. In addition to that, I got to be deeply steeped in Reformed political thought. Is that what we're saying now? I mean, when we're talking about the promotion of religion, Reformed political thought is relevant how to the discussion? Just because we're Reformed? Does that mean they aced reform, the political thought? The reformers aced it? Did they get everything right? Did they get anything wrong? Okay, maybe they're just saying this. You know, we're Reformed. Let's just start it off with a statement about the history of Reformed political thought. Okay, but which I don't think anyone should mind that. I think it's a perfectly valid thing to say. But I know that a lot of these guys aren't saying it because, we're not saying it because we think it's relevant to the discussion. They're saying it because this is our foundation. Reformed political thought is the system that we just assume, and we're going to build everything off the Reformed political thought without proving it first. We're just going to assume it. Without going to the Bible and saying, wait a sec, let's compare this to the scriptures. Did they get it right here? Without even doing that, we're just going to take it. We're going to set it right here. And we're going to start building off of it without examining it. I don't think that's wise. And he's talking about being prudential. I don't think it's prudential at all.
Has been nearly ubiquitous. Moreover, most have considered it
nearly ubiquitous, right? So there's a tradition, Oh, but it's a small one. So you're telling me there's a tradition. Okay.
Immutable and absolute, and thus a civil ruler must promote true religion. But any application of that principle is a political act, and therefore
Civil magistrate must promote true religion because the Reformed political thought says so.
occurs in the realm of contingency and prudence, harken back to what I just said. That is, every political act is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Means to ends are contingents, and circumstances determine the proper mode and measure for an act to achieve its intended end.
I love this kind of talk because it's so vague that you sound smart listening to it, but you actually don't get anywhere. And this is exactly with respect to this man, this is exactly what he's talking about. You can't just sit here and pontificate. You got to give us an avenue towards it, right? This is just silly pontification about a means to an end, the end of a thing. What is a thing, and the thing of an end, and all that kind of stuff. It's confusing. It's silly, and these people, it's ivory tower pontification.
What is necessary in genus, that is to say, in a universal, may be contingent in species. Another way of saying this is something universally may be good, practically not so. Continuing on.
Something might be universal and good, but practically not so. Now, I'm not going to say, oh, that's ridiculous. That sounds dumb. I want to know what they think of as an example of that. I'm not saying there are no examples. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. It just says universally a good, but practically not so. I want to know what that is. I know Stephen Wolf talked about this. He said sometimes a policy might be right, but it might not be prudent. Like it might be the right thing to do, but it's not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do right now. Basically, rephrasing, sometimes the right thing to do is not the right thing to do, which is definitely something you don't want the leaders of your nation saying.
For this reason, there are two separate questions. Listen carefully. Whether the promotion of true religion is an absolute principle that binds civil government, and, assuming that's true, the second question, in what particular ways ought this or that civil government promote true religion given its particular circumstances? The former question is principally for political theorists and secondarily for theologians, while the latter is properly one for civil magistrates. Again, notice this distinction. One of these questions is a question of political theory. What is the ideal? A question for theologians in a Christian nation. What is the ideal? The second question is one for the civil magistrates who must act prudently.
Man, it's like, I wish we had like some sort of law that we could go to where like all this stuff is written down about the purpose of the magistrate and his limitations and powers and authorities given to him so that, he could do this, promote true religion. Just wish we had a body of law.
The focus of this report is on the question of the principle, and as the reader might expect, we affirm. So they're affirming the answer to question number one: the state, the civil government must promote true religion. Now, demonstrating the principle, that is the principle that the state must promote true religion, does not end the investigation, as questions remain about the limits of authority. That is, we must determine the objective extension of this principle, or the lawful set of species of a civil action. The civil magistrate promotes true religion morally and properly only within the bounds of the civil power's intrinsic limitations. For example, he may not coerce inward faith or force one to confess a lie. He may not assume for himself the preaching of the word, the administration of the sacraments, or the keys of the kingdom. He may not command that this or that man be ordained or deposed. These limitations are intrinsic to political authority by its nature as designed by God. They have not come from adventitious divine command. The magistrate's lawful actions are limited by the proper objects of civil authority, namely outward things. The distinction, if you look at the PCA's report on Christian nationalism, is there's this distinction between sacra sacra and in sacris. Sacra sacra means about or around sacred things. In sacris means in certain things. So does someone have the authority about and around the church, aka, can you fly a pride flag? Yes. Does that mean he has the authority to administer baptism in sacred things? No. That's what's being gotten at here. With these boundaries in place, the question then turns to the means. As we have said, the decision to act in this way or that way in obedience to the principle is the magistrate's decision, further limited by a constitutional arrangement that's here in the United States, as he considers the best means.
Does anyone actually think that the magistrate is seriously limited by the Constitution? I mean, in a certain way, it makes it slower, right? I guess the Constitution is kind of makes there's a flood coming to your house, and the Constitution kind of slows it down. But when it gets to your house isn't standing, that's going to mow over your house, right? I mean, with all the silliness going on, the fact that it's illegal to do the right thing, has the Constitution really restrained the magistrate appropriately when we've made these laws legalizing wickedness? If the magistrate is legalizing wickedness, what has the Constitution done to stop him? We have the nightmarish situation of a lot of the third world countries happening in our country right now, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. In some ways, there's not even anything the magistrate can do to stop it, right? We're going down a track that cannot be stopped by statism. It can't even be stopped. I'm sorry to tell you this, Christian nationalists, but it can't even stop by Christians doing the statism. Even the Christians, if they got the reins of power, they can't stop it. Because of the nature of the beast, they cannot stop what's coming and what's happening right now. The answer to our problems is not more statism. It's not even Christians doing the statism. The answer to our problems is repentance from turning away from God's law. That's the only thing that's going to fix this. It's the hand of God coming onto our nation and blessing it because we've turned to him and said, we've turned away from your law, Lord. Right? There's nothing that's going to stop what's coming short of repentance.
To an end. Modern Christians often assume that affirming the principle as a generic and absolute command, which they affirm, commits one to absolute commands regarding the means. So by affirming the universal, civil government must promote true religion, many modern Christians feel as though that then means I have to do X, Y, and Z, which they deny. Church establishment, for example, is but a means to the promotion of religion, not an end in itself or an absolute duty. It is but one species of acts flowing from the genus, the category, which may or may not be appropriate in a given situation. The magistrate may, under the right circumstances, promote religion without establishing a church. The same is true of all species of acts, such as the magistrate punishing blasphemy. Affirming this kind of act as morally permissible does not, ipso, commit the magistrate to enact a civil policy that punishes blasphemy, nor must he punish every instance of blasphemy or punish each with the same severity. We can reduce this even to individual acts. Whether an individual civil act, say punishing a certain obstinate heretic, is good or evil is not determined solely by the genus or species of the act, but also by whether the individual act concretely achieves the intended good end. Thus, affirming the principle that government must promote true religion does not logically entail any particular policy or concrete civil act. Rather, it means a civil magistrate must act in a way conducive to the end. But more precisely, he must act according to the possibilities of effective action that are afforded to him by the circumstances. So,
I mean, this kind of wording just kind of gives this huge swath of movement to the politician to maneuver wherever the heck he wants to go with it. This kind of wording is not nailing anything down concretely, right? So the whole argument you just heard there was, yes, the civil magistrate has a responsibility, but he doesn't actually have to, right? He must promote true religion, but he doesn't have to. That's what you just heard. He must, but he doesn't have to. That was just a long way to say that he must, but he doesn't have to. And so it's this kind of doublespeak that politicians, they love this kind of stuff. Man, they feed off of this kind of stuff because it gives them the necessary fog for them to hide what they're doing and convince you that they're doing something magical in the mist.
So the fact that we agree with, say, John Calvin that the civil magistrate ought to promote true religion and that magistrates, in the abstract, may punish heresy does not commit us to advocating for a return to Calvin's Geneva. This does not follow. Dropping a 16th century Genevan law book onto America, whether 18th century or 21st century, would be disastrous. Indeed, it would be immoral not because it violates the intrinsic limitations of politics, but because it would in practice lead to anarchy, disruption, and likely the overthrow of the state.
I actually don't think that Calvin's Geneva, I mean, this is just, hot take for me here. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I don't think Calvin's Geneva was the target of that argument there, that we can't just take Calvin's Geneva and plop it on here. That would be disastrous. I think the target of that was the law of God. I think that was the target there. We can't take the law of God and plop it on here because it would be disastrous. You hear them say this all the time, right? I think they're too afraid to say we can't do that with the law of God in their writings. That's for podcasts and stuff like that. But I think Calvin's Geneva was an excuse to really aim at the Mosaic polity. Like we can't take God's law and plop it down because it wouldn't work, and we'd lose the state. And what would all these be for if our offices were canceled?
Civil action is good and proper only if it achieves or contributes to a good end within its objective limitations. However, the magistrate must promote true religion in some way, even if circumstances significantly constrain him. Some civil acts are ordinarily necessary in our view, such as Sabbath laws, not because they are absolute duties of magistrates per the genus of action, but because they are ordinarily moral necessities. They are prudentially always necessary and proper. Hope everybody's thinking cap was on for that. Again, that's an introduction from Reformed Christian politics. And so they lay out these two categories.
It's just a long way of saying he should, but he doesn't have to.
The ideal and the theoretical, and then the practical and applied. And what I want to do in this first part is just lay out to you that if you are a Protestant and you call yourself Reformed, that first part, that the civil government must promote true religion, is a thoroughly Protestant, thoroughly Reformed view. You
forgot the word thoroughly biblical.
You can disagree. You are permitted to disagree. Some of the particular Baptists disagreed, and they said the civil government must promote natural religion. That is to say, generic religion. There's a God. There is some type of deity. We would go farther, and they must promote the true religion, that is Christianity. So you can have disagreement, but here's what you have to do. You have to be intellectually honest. You have to be intellectually honest and say, I disagree with John Calvin. I disagree with the Belgian Confession. I disagree with the Westminster Confession of Faith. I disagree with Calvin. I disagree with him. I disagree. I take exception from all of these men. And what you're implicitly saying if with that, let's be honest, I'm smarter than them. I think Calvin's wrong because I know better than him. We here are humble enough to say we are not better than John Calvin. We are not better than Francis Turretin. We do not know more than the Westminster Divines. And so we look back, we can say, yes, this accords with Scripture. We would agree with it, and we think that they're right.
The silver.
Okay. So that's kind of the heart of what I want to get to right there. I've seen this so many times now. 3 different people who are Christian nationalists have told me that they've used the older and wiser trick. Older and wiser, right? I don't know if you know anything about Calvin. Maybe you've never read Calvin before, but he went to the people before him and totally trashed them, the scholastics. He hated the scholastics. If these guys were sitting with John Calvin at the time, they would definitely say to him, what do you think, you're older than wiser than the scholastics? John Calvin, are you saying, just be intellectually honest, John Calvin, do you think you know more than them? That you disagree with these guys? You think you know more than John Duns Scotus? You think you know more than Aquinas? John? Do you think you know more than these people? Just be intellectually honest, John. Because John Calvin trashed people like that. He trashed Aquinas. He trashed the scholastic fathers. He didn't like them. There was basically 2 he liked, and he loved Augustine. That much is obvious. But I see, this is the problem I have, this whole Reformed tradition thing, where we're like, yeah, the Reformers nailed it. And you know that they fought with each other, right? And they trashed each other. And they called each other names. And they, at times, they even anathemized each other, if I remember, Luther and Zwingli. And I'm like, this is why these guys who are Reformed tradition, I'm like, you're out of touch with the Reformed tradition. Because you're not promoting the Reformed tradition. The Reformed tradition doesn't say, hey, follow our traditions. It doesn't say that. Part of the Reformed tradition is trashing people that came before you. Do you know that? How many times Luther ripped on the popes who came before him? Other divines, other scholastics, he just trashed them. And it's like, all this reform talk, it's like, I don't think you're reading the reformers. You're out of touch with what they're saying. As if they were all on the same team, as if they're monolithic. I just want to rewind that and say it again and hear it again.
Disagree.
Okay, because it's so bizarre to me that anyone who claims to like the Reformed tradition would say you're not allowed to disagree with people who came before you, or that you are kind of surrendering some sort of ground if you do. You've surrendered some sort of authority or some sort of credibility because you disagree with people who were, 500 years ago.
We would go farther, and they must promote the true religion that is Christianity. So you can have disagreement, but here's what you have to do. You have to be intellectually honest. You have to be intellectually honest and say, I disagree with John Calvin. I disagree with the Belgian Confession. I disagree with the Westminster Confession of Faith. I disagree with Calvin. I disagree with him. I disagree. I take exception from all of these men. And what you're implicitly saying with that, let's be honest, I'm smarter than them.
And it's this kind of silly. I mean, that's a silly statement. It's a self-refuting statement, right? And we got these people online walking around saying similar things. That like, John Calvin, you can't criticize him or disagree with him because if you do that, you're saying you're smarter than him. When you look at John Calvin and look at the tradition that he established for himself and others, that it's okay to look back at people who came before you and trash them because, yes, they can be wrong. And just because they have age and time and education more than you doesn't mean that they're right about everything. Doesn't mean that they aced it. Every one of those guys had a theological point that was wrong. It's okay to disagree with them. Like, are we on like a downward slide? That's what I want to know. Are we on a downward slide from the reformers? Have we been just going down and no one has been able to hold a candle to them ever since the Westminster Confession? Is that what we're doing here? And it's this kind of attitude that makes me think about what's this really all about here? What's this really all about? And the fear that I think that he's fomenting is, I'm not in the Reform Club. I better agree with all reformers or I'm not in the club. Right? Which just leads me again to conclude, what's Christian nationalism all about? Just about getting our guy in office, another political party just like the rest of them. Not really about reformation. If they're about reformation, then they would criticize the people that came before them, because that's what reformers did. They criticized the people who came before them. A lot of them. And if you want to be like the reformers, you got to look at the long-term effects of people who came before you and the traditions that they set in motion, and you've got to reform those traditions. That's what they did. Some better than others. Some at cost to the other traditions that the other ones set up. What are we doing here? This can't be a serious argument that just because you disagree with Calvin is you saying, oh, I think I'm smarter than him. That's a self-refuting, totally irrelevant argument from authority. This is an argument from authority. And I really hope you people who are out there saying similar things like that would just stop it. Please, stop it. If you want to take a tradition from the reformers, what they did was they didn't go back and relive yesterday's battles. They fought the battles of their day using the scriptures. At times, they trashed a lot of the people who came before them. Can one of you Reformed tradition people please pick up on that tradition eventually? Like, come on, hey, there's a tradition here of criticizing people who came before you. They all did it. All of them. They criticized them. I don't know of one reformer that I've ever read that hasn't criticized somebody in the past who's older and wiser than they are. And we got people with platforms walking around saying, well, if you disagree with Calvin, that's you implicitly saying that, you're smarter than him. And the fear there is not that, there's no biblical warning there, right? This is not a biblical warning. This is not a biblical moral case against disagreeing with the people who came before, right? You're not sort of breaking any sort of Bible verse by disagreeing with people who are older and wiser, right? It's okay. The older and wiser people never said, don't disagree with me. They never said that, right? So it's okay. Sure, with counseling, they can come to forgive you, right? But if you're walking around saying silly things like this, like, well, if you disagree with Calvin or the Belgian Confession, you're saying you're smarter than all those people. That's totally irrelevant to the discussion. Totally irrelevant to the discussion. This guy right here, Wes, I think is his name, he disagrees with somebody somewhere. How is me parachuting in, saying to him, hey, you disagree with this guy right here, I guess you must be wrong. You think he's going to be like, oh, wow, oh, my word, I disagree with somebody who's older than wiser than me. Oh, no, I better change my position. You think he cares? They don't care. They do not care. They do not care. It's not even just on a single point, because he's trying to make a case like this is not just a single point. This is a tradition. This is a tradition of thinking this way, right? But I know there's traditions of thinking a certain way that he doesn't agree with, of people who are older than wiser than him. The Eastern Orthodox tradition, he doesn't agree with that. Well, you think you're smarter than they are? You think you're smarter than all those people who are definitely all agreed on this one point over here? And there's definitely a tradition. Oh, so you're saying all those saints are idiots, huh? You disagree with Ignatius. You disagree with Athanasius. You disagree with John of Damascus. So you think you're older? You think you're smarter than those people who are older than wiser than you? We can't have people walking around calling themselves Reformed and making arguments from authority. Much of the Reformation was against the argument from authority. It was an anti-tradition movement, anti-authority, anti-argument from authority movement. Because the Catholic Church was breathing down their neck saying, you got to listen to us because we're the one true church. But you're not biblical. It doesn't matter if we're not biblical or not. That's irrelevant. We're the authority. You got to listen to us. Right? We're the voice of God now. And the Reformers said, cool, don't care. That's anti-argument from authority. And here we have people walking around saying, oh yeah, I'm Reformed. By the way, argument from authority. It's just like, you're not reading the Reformers. I don't think these guys are reading the Reformers. I don't. I think they read excerpts from them. I think they read hot takes from other guys. And, he said, have your thinking cap on. If they are reading the Reformers, there's nothing to do with their thinking cap on. I think they read the Reformers trashing people who came before them, trashing traditions that came before them. The whole argument about the Church of England versus the Puritans. And the Puritans were just, there was novelty among them. The Separatists established the Congregational Church, and they created a movement of independence. That was novel up until that point. Were they wrong? Were they saying all the Presbyterians thinkers who came before them were wrong? I guess they were, right? They had this tradition of Presbyterians. But that's what the separatists did when they came to America, through the New England way. These guys would have been right there with the Anglicans, trashing the Puritans. Look at these guys. They think they're so smart. They have lay preachers, right? They allow lay preaching. You know that William Brewster was arrested for writing down notes from a sermon and sharing it with other people. You know that was illegal. Why? Because you're not an authority. You weren't trained. You don't have the right criteria. You don't have the right pedigree to be able to take notes and talk to people about this kind of stuff. You're not allowed to do that. And the Puritans said, that's kind of just a really bad idea to have this kind of stuff. And so they denied that whole tradition. They denied with all these older and wiser men who came before them. And consequently founded America. America was basically born out of a denial of the silly traditions of popery and Anglicanism. And yet we have these people who are just kind of running back towards it. Full steam ahead. Let's go back to tradition. And let's do the arguments from authority again. You got Joel Webbin on here, as I played the clip many times. We need to be licensing pastors again. And it's just like, what tradition are we going with here, man? Because there's reformers who did believe in licensing pastors and reformers who didn't believe in that. Much of the American tradition was born out of a denial of the licensing of pastors. And my question is, which one are we going with here, man? Which one? Because it's not monolithic. And that's why I think they like the term Reformed tradition, because it's not specific. And it gives them enough wiggle room to really institute their ideas from beginning to end. That's all I have for you today. I hope everyone who listens to this podcast is equipped to go out and fight the battles of their day. That's what this podcast is trying to do. We're not trying to fight yesterday's battles. We're trying to fight the battle where it's being fought. Who said that? Oh, it was a reformer, Martin Luther. If you're not fighting where the battle is raging, then you're wasting your time, right? And going back to your tradition is not fighting the battle where it's raging, right? You're fighting yesterday's battles using yesterday's tools. You need to update your arsenal. Sometimes it's an arms race. And we got one weapon, and it's the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God. No tradition can replace that. Thanks again for listening to the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint. And remember, my friends, think and reform.